What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So today I want to talk about Nate Diaz and Daniel Cormier and the internet beef that has developed between them. Now, it feels topical because Nate Diaz is, of course, fighting tonight, and I've seen clips from their mutual podcast appearances where they're trashing each other. I've seen clips of those making the rounds on YouTube, so I figured I'd weigh in. Because I do actually think there's a little bit of nuance to this situation, even though it seems on the surface just like kind of unprompted trash talk. So, bear in mind, I haven't seen every damn interview that either of these guys have done. I don't know if either of them have clarified anything or walked anything back or whatever. But I've just seen the initial clip where Diaz trashes DC and then DC responds to Diaz. That's what I've seen. And from that, I think we can still draw some conclusions. Because Nate Diaz was talking about Cormier, and he made it sound like he wasn't very familiar with his resume, that he'd only seen him fight once, that he saw him fight on a card that Diaz had also fought on, and it sounded like it was the rematch between Cormier and Stipe, and Diaz is being dismissive because Cormier is a wrestler, and the Diaz brothers are always dismissive of wrestlers, and he basically said, yeah, he looked good at first, he's picking him up, dropping him on the ground, yada yada, but then the fight progresses, he starts getting punched in the stomach, and then he quits, and then he cries afterwards. And that was what Diaz was saying. And he's basically calling him a punk for being a wrestler who then wilted under the punches and cried after losing. That was Diaz's whole thing. Cormier responded and said, look, yeah, I cried. I'm not going to deny it. I cried because this mattered to me as much as anything can matter to a person. I am a true competitor. I actually chase greatness. It actually matters to me if I win or if I lose. You don't care if you lose. You're used to losing. You've lost countless times. You'll lose on Saturday and then be back Monday acting like you're the best guy in the world when actually you're just average. And I'd say to your face that you're average. And that's basically, from what I've seen, that is more or less the sum of the exchange. And I think most people are taking DC's side in this whole thing, and I can see why. And his side has more strength to it, I think. However, there's some nuance here because whilst Diaz is talking shit, Diaz is kind of saying fighting words. He is trashing this guy, calling him a punk effectively. And yeah, that's uncalled for. It's sort of out of the blue. It's sort of ignorant to say because by Diaz's own admission, he barely has seen Cormier fight. He barely knows the guy. So it's quite a lot of heat to be throwing someone's way when you hardly know anything about them, And it is silly, not unlike when Diaz was starting shit with Brendan Schaub, and Brendan Schaub pointed out, dude, I don't care who you think you are, you're a goddamn lightweight, I'm a heavyweight, I would smash you. It's the same thing here. Daniel Cormier, right now in his prime, whenever, would smash Nate Diaz. So there's a bit of I'm not saying Diaz is a punk and that Diaz would, retreat and cower if confronted, but he is also benefiting from the knowledge that neither of these guys are likely to actually call him on it, that neither of these guys are likely to do what Masvidal did to Colby and just show up at the club and start throwing hands. So that is sort of a punk thing to do in its own right, I would say, to talk shit when you know you're probably safe. So you got all those dynamics. We'll save Diaz's point for last because, again, I think most people are siding with Cormier, and I can see why. Cormier's point has a lot of truth. Cormier, yes, I've seen Cormier cry more than once after a fight. And there's if you remember, he had that beef with, oh my God, what is that fighter's name? Patrick something. The guy who came in on short notice to fight Cormier, and he hadn't even fought in the UFC yet, but he had wrestled with Cormier, and he got some drama stirred because he talked about a time he ostensibly made Cormier cry in the training room, and so they got some beef going, and then Cormier smashed him, of course, when they fought. I think that was the fight immediately before Cormier fought Dan Henderson, if I remember. It was his light heavyweight debut in the UFC. But, oh my God, the guy's name is just escaping me. But it's similar to that because, again, in that story, that guy said, I made Cormier cry in the training room. And Cormier, from what I recall, didn't actually deny that happened. He basically instead was mad that the guy was outing it. He basically said, hey, what happens in the training room stays in the training room. And from what I've heard, that story, and this is no doubt a very touchy subject, understandably, but like I've heard that story corresponds to the period during which Daniel Cormier's daughter had died. So Cormier is like a full-time wrestler. He's training. His daughter dies. And yes, he apparently had a bad training day and wept after the fact. If so, I don't think anyone would have anything insulting to say about that. I think we would only sympathize. Even if that's not true, even if I'm off about that, I mean, his daughter did die, but even if that's not the timeline, like, for those of you who don't know, when you're training full time, when your body is through the ringer, when your nervous system is through the ringer, when you're cutting weight constantly, so your hormones are getting fucked up and you're hungry and you're agitated, and on top of that, like, every part of your being, all your hopes and dreams are invested in something, like, yeah, like, the toughest people in the world will sometime have fucking meltdowns. Like, that happens. Like, I can totally picture someone who's trying to become an Olympic gold medalist having a bad day in the training room and fucking, like, breaking down. Like, that just happens, okay? You know? And sure, you could do, like, Chael Sonnen has talked about that and basically said, hey, yes, you can do that, just go do it privately, you know? Go off in a room somewhere, cry, throw things, do whatever you need to. Just don't do it on the podium, don't do it on the mat. Do it off in a room somewhere. I get all that. But the point is, this does happen. This is like part of the human psyche. This is part of the human experience. You know, it's like shitting your pants in a war zone or something like that. It's one of the ugly realities that does happen sometimes, right? So, so on that front, someone like Cormier, like weeping, and same after a fight, same after he's been, you know, because I think he did it after he lost to Jones in the rematch, and I think he did it. You know, they were talking about the rematch with Stipe. It's like, yeah, it's like he's fucking concussed too. Like he's you know, his adrenaline's through the roof. He's concussed. He's exhausted. Like, his hopes and dreams are being fucking ripped away from him. Like, yeah, like tough guys cry sometimes. I'm reading the Iliad right now because I like the classics, and it's been on my list forever, and I haven't read it yet. And so I'm reading the Iliad, and then I'll read the Odyssey in preparation for the Chris Nolan movie that's coming out. Like, warriors in the Iliad weep. You know, they're still badasses. They still pull their shit together when it counts, and they still, you know, do battle, and they still kick ass. But they weep in situations because, like, this is intense shit, and that's life, you know? So, on that level, I think it's silly for anybody, including Nate Diaz, to mock Daniel Cormier for having wept after losing a title fight. However, I do see the flip side to that, where Diaz didn't say this, but I suspect this is like part of what's motivating it. Diaz, as we all know, is from an incredibly rough neighborhood. You know, he's from Stockton, had a very, you know, kind of street, you know, existence his whole life. He's seen some shit. You know, who knows? He may have done some shit. I don't know. But, you know, if you're from a neighborhood like that, you almost certainly have, like, lost people. You've lost family. You've lost friends. From drugs, from suicide, from gang violence, etc. Like, if that's something you're used to, then I get where you would look at a cage fight as, like, less serious by comparison. And I get where, if you've experienced, like, the more genuinely tragic losses of those kind, you would look at someone crying just because they lost a belt as being kind of pathetic. Now, again, that's not fair to Daniel Cormier, himself a guy who lost his daughter, which is no greater loss can there be. So it would be silly to suggest that Daniel Cormier cried when he lost his belt simply because he'd never experienced true loss. That wouldn't be accurate at all. But I see where, especially if you're Diaz, and you don't know that about the guy, by your own admission, you're kind of ignorant about the guy. I get where, from Diaz's mind, as this kind of street guy who views fighting as, like, a cool thing to do, and views fighting in a certain way, which I'll get to, I can get where you would see some wrestler get beat up and cry and just be like, yeah, this guy's a pussy. I do get that. Okay, I genuinely do. Now, Cormier went after Diaz, though. He said, you know, you don't care. You're used to losing. You lose all the time. You'll lose on Saturday, come back on Monday and say, ooh, I'm still the best in the world. Everyone else sucks. I really won, yada, yada. He goes, but in reality, you are average. Now, is that fair? There's some truth to it. There is truth to the fact that Diaz has lost several times. there's truth to the fact that the Diaz brothers famously, and their fans, act like they've never lost. You know, they sort of unironically do what Chael does, you know, and they basically treat it like, anytime I don't get finished is basically a win. I would have won with no time limit. I represent this old school, traditional martial arts samurai approach where it's all about the finish, and you guys are all gaming the system, you know, by trying to outpoint me. They have that attitude, and that is, there's some legitimacy to that. I'll get to that when I kind of discuss Diaz's point of view. But there's a lot of bullshit to that, too. There's a lot of self-delusion in that. There's a lot of ego stroking in that, you know, and Cormier is correctly calling it out. However, it's not fair to say that Nate Diaz is average, okay? Nate Diaz has beaten some incredible fighters. Nate Diaz fought for a belt in the toughest division in the UFC. Like, Nate Diaz has had a million UFC fights in 2 different weight classes. You know, it kind of reminds me of when Chael Sonnen retired and Luke Thomas said he wasn't a great fighter, and then Chael Sonnen put out that piece rebutting Luke and calling Luke out, and then Luke fact-checked some of what Chael said, and some of what Chael said wasn't true, and it became a whole fucking thing. But there was legitimacy in the idea that, like, Chael took umbrage at being considered not a great fighter, and I get both points of view. I get where Chael is great in a sense, and he's not great in a different sense, meaning it is great to be a top 10 guy in 2 different weight classes. It is great to fight for multiple UFC belts. It is great to effectively be the WEC middleweight champion, etc., etc., etc. It's great to have, like, over 40 fights across 3 weight classes, you know, that, and just fight a who's who across generations. That's all great, meaning your average fighter is a local level fighter. Your average fighter is a regional fighter. Your average fighter is not fucking doing that stuff. It is great. Like, he is great at fighting. However, it's not great in, like, the GOAT sense of great. Like, he's not a GOAT contender. He's not even a middleweight GOAT contender, is Chael Sonnen. So in that sense, Luke was right. In the former sense, Chael was right. And they're kind of talking past each other, and it's a sensitive subject because Chael just retires, and he's expecting to get his fucking flowers, and Luke has to dog on him. So, like, I get all that. And Chael is a bullshitter, so of course his response has errors in it. But in any case, it's similar to that, where it's like Nate Diaz, yeah, is he great in the sense that he's going to go down as one of the all-time great lightweights or all-time great fighters? No. But is he great in the sense that, yeah, for a fighter to do what he has done is very great. It's way, way, way above average. It's not average at all, you know? Someone like me was an average fighter. Yeah, I mean, so, you know, meaning to say Nate is better. So, in that sense, I see what Cormier is saying. I also disagree. Now, someone like Cormier, someone who is actually in the GOAT discussion, someone who is a 2-division champion, not just 2-division fighter, like, someone like he, you know, he can talk some shit. He can be like, yeah, by my standard, you're average. It's like, yeah, you know, fair enough. Now, circling back to Diaz, though, and to his point of view, Diaz does represent a sort of old school approach to martial arts and fighting, and it's one that I largely co-sign, so I am going to take his side a little bit here. Diaz comes from that old school mentality, that early UFC mentality, that Gracie challenge mentality, etc., that traditional martial arts mentality, where it is about actual fighting. It's not about sport, it's not about competition, and the focus is on finishing people, and that's why the Diaz brothers so heavily just pour their stats into boxing and jiu-jitsu. You know, they want to be able to knock you out, they want to be able to submit you, they want to be able to finish you. And even though they're fighting in a sport with rounds and time limits that make that harder in different ways and make gaming it and winning decisions much more viable, like, nevertheless, they bring that mentality, and they largely they're the Don Quixotes in the equation, right? They're tilting at windmills, and they're standing by their principles, even if it's shooting themselves in the foot, okay? So I get all that, and that is largely how I see things too. And if you've been watching my channel a long time, you know my preference for action fighters and things like that, and my attitude towards, you know, more laissez-faire rules, more lax rules in terms of PED uses, etc. None of this should surprise you. But, you know, all that to say, yeah, I get what Diaz is saying. I get where Diaz would see a wrestler come out, try to win the fight with wrestling, which doesn't finish anybody, and then would wilt once the other guy just withstands that and then starts putting it on him with the boxing. I get where Diaz, from his point of view, where the whole point of fighting is to finish a person. It's not to outpoint them. It's not to win by an inch or a mile. You know, it's not that competitor mindset. It's that fighter mindset. It's that warrior mindset. Not that Diaz is a warrior. I mean, you have to actually, you know, fight in a fucking war to be a warrior. But he, you know, it's that same philosophy. Like, I get where he would look at Cormier in general, and that he would look at Cormier in that specific fight, that rematch with Stipe, and he would be dismissive. And I think there's something to that. Now, it's not totally fair to Cormier. It's not like Cormier never knocks someone out. He knocks Stipe out, for Christ's sake. It's not like Cormier never submitted a guy. But yeah, Cormier won a lot of decisions. Cormier was a wrestler. And yeah, like, that fight was a story of that. It was, you know, it's like MMA Shea has been dogging on Cormier unfairly, I think, but he's been dogging on Cormier and basically pointing out the degree to which Cormier's cardio couldn't hold up when he would try to press his wrestling. And there's truth to that, and that fight illustrated that. He poured the wrestling on, he couldn't keep doing it. And then Stipe, you know, it was a boxing match. Stipe figured out the obvious flaw in Cormier's defense, which is that he's weak to the body, and he took him out. Again, Diaz throwing shade at that, I don't think that's unwarranted. You know, just like Cormier saying, hey, compared to me, you're average, that's not unwarranted either. I see that. I can see where they can both kind of punch down at each other from those different vantage points. And, you know, in summary, it was unnecessary. Like, it all started because Diaz started talking shit, and then Cormier responded in kind. So, you know, that is what it is. They are fighters, you know. But I see both sides of it. I see where Cormier, I think it is ultimately bullshit to mock Cormier for crying. I think it is ultimately, like, true that, yeah, Cormier is, like, the much more elite fighter. He can punch down and call Diaz average in that sense. However, Diaz is not, in actuality, an average fighter. And I see where, from Diaz's point of view, both from sort of his background in the neighborhood he comes from and also just the martial arts tradition and philosophy he represents, I get where someone like Cormier, or specifically Cormier in that performance against Stipe in the rematch, would kind of put him off, would provoke him into saying something like that, where he'd hear about that guy over and over again and be like, and finally say, yeah, I've only seen the guy fight once and he seemed like a fucking pussy. I could kind of see why he would say that, okay? So, you know, not picking a winner or loser in this, just kind of saying that's how I see it from both sides here. And I do think there's some legitimacy. I do think it's avoidable, but at the same time, it's not a big deal that it happened because, again, fighters talking shit about each other is more to be expected than to be, like, pearl clutched over. You know, so that's what I got on that. I wanted to do a quick video this afternoon before the fights. Let me know what you think. Let me know, you know, if you've got a dog in this race, if you care, you know, if you side with DC, if you side with Diaz, if you agree or disagree with my analysis, you know, if you think Diaz does actually suck, if you think Cormier is actually a pussy for crying, whatever. If you got takes on it, let me know, comment. If you like the video, click like. If you like my videos in general, please subscribe. Take care.